Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. We are so excited. We've got a great guest. We're going to tell you about him in a second. But first of all, Nan, I have a question for you.
Yes.
We all talk about the Academy Awards a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like, as I say, it's our Super Bowl.
It is the Super Bowl.
And we always get outraged when somebody doesn't win an Academy Award.
Yes.
Or maybe they won and we don't think they should have won an Academy Award.
Right.
Is there one performer that really gets you that they have never won or should have won for a performance?
Yes. I mean, I feel like I talk about this all the time, but Glenn Close should have won for The Wife. It just floors me. And I know people were going to get letters, but that's the one that I just drives me crazy.
Yes.
And she's been nominated so many times. At any rate, that's mine.
Well, I think everybody who listens to this podcast knows that mine are Myrna Loy and Irene Dunn.
Oh,
How
yes.
did they never win Academy
They
Awards?
never, exactly.
And also, I'm going to throw Edward G. Robinson in there for myself.
Okay.
Too, so,
Yeah.
You know, it just baffles the mind that those three never won a competitive Oscar.
We could go on and on with that, right?
We could.
Right.
So we're really excited about our special guest today. He is somewhat of an expert about the Academy Awards. I'm going to say it because his books reflect that. And he's also invested in classic films like we are. He's a passionate historian of films and an incredible author. And so today we have John DiLeo with us. Welcome, John.
Welcome, John. Now, everybody, John is the author of 7 books, including, and I'm going to list them all, okay? And You Thought You Knew Classic Movies, 100 Great Film Performances You Should Remember, but Probably Don't, Screensavers, 40 Remarkable Movies Awaiting Rediscovery. This is one I cannot wait to dive into. Tennessee Williams and Company, His Essential Screen Actors, Screensavers 2, My Grab Bag of Classic Movies, 10 Movies at a Time, a 350-film journey through Hollywood and America 1930 to 1970. There Are No Small Parts, 100 Outstanding Film Performances with Screen Time of 10 minutes or less. And the book we're going to talk about today, your 8th title, recently published, not even nominated, 40 overlooked co-stars of Oscar-winning performances. John, that's amazing. Where does all that fit in your brain?
First of all, I'm sorry my titles are so long.
They are long.
But those subtitles are necessary always to explain what the title means. So
Yes,
I get that,
yes.
but I know I dread having to say them out loud. Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me, Steve, Nan. It's a pleasure to be here. It's lovely I'm looking forward to this chat.
Great,
Oh,
great.
nice.
Yeah.
We know a little bit more about John because we like to build him up and tell you about him. Besides being a prolific writer, he's also been an annual participant in the Black Bear Film Festival in Milford, Pennsylvania. He has conducted interviews in the past with luminaries such as Farley Granger, Arlene Dahl, Marge Champion, Keir Dullea, Jane Powell, Rex Reed, Tab Hunter, Lorna Luft, Jane Alexander. The list goes on and on and on. So we have a lot to talk about today. So.
We really do.
Yeah.
Well, let's just dive in. John, since you have written 8 books, we would love to hear what your origin story with classic film is. How did you become so passionate?
I think I was lucky. I grew up in a household with 2 sets of grandparents. One lived with us and one was next door. And there was a grandfather in one set and a grandmother in the other who were both passionate about the movies.
Oh, wow.
There was always an old movie on television. And my parents were devout movie goers. They always went to the movies. And so we went as a family. I'm the oldest of 3.
Okay.
And so old movies were just always around. Always, someone would say, "Oh, you got to sit down and watch this.
Yes.
You're going to cry. You know, you're going to laugh. You're going to
Right,
look at this musical number." And I was hooked. I was totally hooked. But I think, like a lot of people who love this stuff, you think what you really, really want is to perform. You know, because you want to be like these people that you see and love, and I want to sing and dance. I want to be Fred Astaire, and then that's the route I did go. I went to Ithaca College as a theater major, came to New York, did the whole aspiring actor thing until I was 35, and at 35, I kind of I don't know, it was like a gut punch where I just lost all my confidence that something really great was going to happen in that world for me. And I kind of lost whatever it takes to keep on going. I felt I'd lost it the morning I turned 35.
Oh, gosh. That's a rude awakening.
It seemed kind of abrupt, but it felt like it was coming from somewhere deep that really wanted to make sure I got the message.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, what else do I have in my back pocket? And I had this love of classic film. Yeah. I had what was perceived by all my friends, this encyclopedic knowledge,
yes,
which was more like something you could do at parties, like name things and like name all the winners of the Oscar in order, that kind of.
I was going to say, I bet you're a great cocktail party guest.
Well, if it's the right crowd, yeah.
And I want you on my team for Trivia Pursuit.
Right. Those were the days, actually. And so what I found out, the first book I did was the quiz book, so there isn't that much writing in it. It's more just little categories.
Right.
And it gave me the confidence to then write more and get better at it and try to get better at it. But I guess I felt like early on I was having kind of the luck I was not ever having as an actor. And it seemed to be, I was old enough to feel that thing of, like, go with the flow, go with the universe, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's like, I'm not used to this. I mean, I'm not saying I never worked, but I'm just saying not used to the enthusiasm I was receiving or the speed at which things were happening.
Sure.
And so in that regard, I'd never looked back. Plus, if you're familiar with what I do, it satisfies the same urges that I was craving to be satisfied as an actor. I try to get a laugh once in a while. I'm trying for effects. I'm using what I know. When I'm talking about an actor, it's like I'm playing the character to figure out what's in the text. What does the actor bring to it? What's the difference? When are they not meeting the text? When are they going beyond? And so I think that's all part of what I had been doing and learning. And so since I primarily, not exclusively, but primarily write about the performances in my books, I think half of them are directly about performances. It feels like it was all part of the journey to get to what I ended up doing and feel like I did kind of find what I was on the road to, getting toward.
It's so interesting to hear that background because Steve and I have talked about your writing and how specific it is. And we'll talk about that later, but it makes perfect sense that as a former performer, you're looking at the performances with such detail.
Yeah. Specifically when in my Tennessee Williams book where I was looking at all these incredible roles, it was at the end of it was like, oh my God, I played Blanche Dubois. I played Brick because I had tried to figure everything out about all the motivations, why, and what the actors were doing. And like I said, I don't need to ever do a Tennessee Williams play because I did them all.
Yeah.
I did them all.
They're all in the book.
Well, going back to your childhood and your passion for movies, was there one particular movie that inspired you?
Well, that is the perfect question for me because when I was 13 years old, 1974, that was the year that That's Entertainment came out. And we lived on Long Island. And we went as a family trip into New York City to see it at the Ziegfeld. And it was amazing. But those were the days when movies opened big in the cities and you waited for months for them to trickle out into the hinterlands. And so I think it was in May when it opened in New York, but it came to where I lived in August. And so that 1 month before school started, I saw That's Entertainment 13 times at the theater that I could walk to. And so if there was an inspiration in my life, clearly what could compete with that? There was a time, it's a long time ago, it's 50 years. I could at one point tell you every number in the order in which it appeared in that movie.
Like an album that you know by heart?
Yes.
That's like getting a Whitman sampler. As far as
really
classic
is.
film.
Eating several boxes of it.
You just get a little bit of everything.
Right.
Yes, and that really just was, let me say, life-changing. It just took the passion level for the art form to the nth degree. That was it. So, and just as a coda, 2 years later, the sequel comes out, and I got my lovely parents who are still with us. We drove in again to go to the premiere of Part 2, again at the Ziegfeld, and all the stars were there, and I met them all.
Wow.
I met Fred Astaire, I met Gene Kelly. It goes on and on. I met them all. I mean, those were the two giants that were there, but everybody was there, including two people that I would interview at the film festival like 40 years later. And I had pictures of them, and Marge Champion was looking, she went, I remember that dress.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
is
that was
fantastic.
wild. So yeah,
I
so
mean,
definitely that movie.
That thing that you felt in your gut at 35, you clearly were listening to the right thing.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But I think I always took it for granted, which I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, sometimes things you're good at but come easily, you take for granted as,
Right.
oh, that's just like a party trick or it's just a hobby. It's not a real thing.
Right,
But
right.
sometimes, we got to get back to those things.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you actually host a show as well. You host an internet show about classic film.
What I do is I actually appear live. We have a historic theater. It's over 100 years old. I think it began as a vaudeville house, but it was a movie house for many decades. And it's the Milford Theater. It's 250 seats. It was beautifully renovated during COVID, and now it's state of the art.
Oh, wow.
And now it's all purpose. But one of the things they do is you can see a classic movie on the big screen most Sundays at 4:00. I come out like it's Turner Classic Movies, but it's live. I'm on stage.
Yes,
Right.
and you talk before.
I talk
and
before.
after?
I usually talk about 12 minutes or so.
So you're the Ben Mankiewicz of
I am.
Pennsylvania.
I tell you where it falls in everybody's careers, what to look for, but never talk about the plot at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I come back after to take questions, and that goes as long as there are questions.
Oh,
and so
that
Now,
sounds
do you have
wonderful.
a say in programming? Do you
I
get
program the whole
to- Oh, you
thing.
do? Oh, how fun
And they
is
take
that?
care of
Yeah.
the
They find the
legalities.
prints and
well,
all of
it's
that?
a variety of. They take care of all of that side of it.
Yeah.
I pick the movies and I show up, and everything else is, the theater takes care of.
Is it 52 weeks out of the year?
I have. They do 2 live plays a year, so that while they're building the set and all, like the screen can't come down and stuff. So I
Yes.
usually get a month off in the spring and the fall, and the summer season's very sporadic
Sure.
because there's a lot
Yeah,
going
people are-
on,
yeah.
and it's hard to get people to come inside, especially when it's gorgeous out.
Yeah.
I'm always the guy praying for bad weather.
I know, right? I hope it rains so
I
they
am.
come. Yeah.
I feel awful, but I still do it. So that's a great joy for me. A lot of them I've seen before on the big screen, but
Yes.
not all of them. Or if I have, it was a million years ago. And
Yeah.
so to often introduce these movies to people, and I'm not talking about necessarily young people, I'm talking about middle-aged and older people who are like, yeah, I saw that when I was a kid, or I came in the middle, and to get people sitting down, paying attention, no interruptions,
Right.
and really watching it and seeing things they never notice because it's usually much smaller at home. All that stuff.
Yes.
It's very gratifying when they love it. It makes you feel like, thank you. I know wasn't
Yeah,
I great?
wasn't it-
Like I made it.
Yeah.
But all I
you're
did was
sharing your love
exactly. You're
with
sharing your
them.
love of something, and if they love it too, it does make you feel
And
like
isn't
you
that-
gave a gift.
Isn't that the joy in it?
Yes,
That-
yes.
And the gratification that you get to share
Yes.
this little kernel of deliciousness with
Yes,
somebody new.
absolutely.
And seeing it on the big screen, Steve and I covered the TCM festival for the first time this past spring, and seeing some of these films,
Yeah.
a couple of them I had never seen at all, but to see them on the big screen
Yeah.
with beautiful prints, it's a thrill.
It
Yeah.
surely
It's
is.
a totally different experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thinking about this particular book, never nominated, what was the inspiration or the impetus for this? What made you write about this subject?
Right.
I love it.
Thank you. Well, as you said, I had written 7 books, and I was obsessed with the Oscars. I remember the first one, I was 10 years old, the first one I watched, and I was so excited, and that was the night George C. Scott refused it. It was like, I was excited. This wasn't exactly what I was expecting.
What a way to start.
Yeah.
It was
Your
a
Oscar
kind of
watching
kind of a
history.
grim way to start it.
Yes.
And I thought, I can't believe for someone who has been so interested in that particular subject for all these years that I never wrote a book about them with all these books. And I thought, I guess it's because what do you do? There's been books about who should have won and every year by year.
Right.
There's been the history of the backstage stories, and I love those books. But what could I do that would, what could I do? That was really the question, the big question.
To make it something different.
And it's fresh. And that's the thing I love about your book. It's fresh. It's never been, this
Thank
topic's
you.
never been
That
Yeah.
was
touched
that
before.
was the point. And I was thinking, well, what stands out to me as something I could write about? And you just start thinking of people who won, and then it occurred to me. I mean, I actually don't remember this, but this is obviously what happened in some conscious way. The example I always go back to is maybe more than any other, the inspiration for the book was Gene Simmons and Elmer Gantry.
Yes.
Burt Lancaster,
Yes.
fantastic in the title role. Of course, he was going to win. You could see while you're watching it, this is an Academy Award performance, but she is fantastic in it in a much more difficult role.
Much
and
more
a much
difficult.
more complicated, playing a much more complicated character.
Right.
A great actress at the peak of her powers. how in the world was she not nominated? And I thought, that's the subject.
Yeah.
If there are enough other examples I could get behind that it could be a book and just not an article that you know,
Right.
or just a list, could I really defend or make a claim for these 40 people?
Yes.
And as I went through the list, I thought there certainly were. And of course, it had to span the decades, or it would have been an oddly shaped book.
Yes.
So luckily, every decade is represented, some a little more than others, but I found that there were. And I didn't know what the number was going to be, but it seemed to kind of clear 3/4 of the way that probably 40 was going to be the number.
Yeah. Was it a lot of prep? And I want to talk about the details of how you prep, but was kind of coming up with your outline of 40, did it take a long time?
Well, I think unlike some of the other ones, this was like the Tennessee Williams book. You're working from a finite list. There are only so many performances that won the Oscar.
Right.
So you had to be someone who was overlooked in a movie where someone won the Oscar. And so that made it
That makes
manageable.
sense.
And then I made a longer list than 40, just any possible example. And these are the movies I want to revisit, make sure my memory is as good as I think it is, and in that way.
Of the great performances in the book that you talk about, I think we each have one that is egregious, that we think is a travesty. Can you pick one or two that just stand out to you as being a travesty? Insane that they were nominated.
Yeah, I mean, Humphrey Bogart and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is one that, there's no way to explain it.
Yeah.
It's up for Best Picture. It wins Best Director and Screenplay. Walter Huston wins.
Right.
It's Humphrey freaking Bogart in one of the greatest performances of his life. He'd already lost for Casablanca.
Yes.
If you look at the nominees, it's not a particularly strong year.
Right.
It's not.
Not at all. And you can tell me anything you want to tell me. There's nothing you could say that would make me understand how that happened.
Right.
So that's a really strong one. I'm sure that was another one early on. It was like, bingo, that's in the book.
Right.
I mean, Donald Sutherland in Ordinary People is another one.
That is mine.
Okay. I'll let you take it, Steve. But that's another one. It doesn't make sense.
It is so baffling to me. That is such a finely tuned, complicated, delicate performance that's every bit as good as Mary Tyler Moore, who was heralded greatly and deservedly.
Yeah.
Every bit as good as Timothy Hutton, who was astounding and so fresh and amazing.
Yeah.
And Judd Hirsch,
I mean,
and it wins Best Picture and Best Director and Best Screenplay.
How was
Best
Donald
Supporting
Sutherland
Actor.
not nominated?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That one, again, there's no answer. That one, I guess, although, in writing about it, made me realize it's his story. It's his story.
It's totally his story.
And we, of course, I mean, I was the same age. I'm the same age as Timothy Hutton. So when I saw it in 1980, it was his story. I was pulling for him the whole way through.
Right.
But I guess maybe it was a combination of the fact that we were blown away by Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
3 years after her show went off the air.
in such a different
It got
role.
so much attention, and deservedly so.
Yeah.
The
Right.
casting, it was a stroke of genius.
Genius.
And then the other thing was we'd never really seen Timothy Hutton before, and he got there was a lot of excitement about the hottest newcomer, whatever.
Right.
So
And I'm gonna throw a shout out for Elizabeth McGovern.
Yeah, she was
also
excellent. Yeah.
amazing. Such a fresh face they found.
Yeah,
Right.
it still should have come through for Donald Sutherland because he kind of made his name playing a lot of strange, oddball characters, and there he was playing an upper middle class
Father,
father,
loving
husband.
father,
Yes, gentle, kind. For him, it was just as much of a stretch as what Mary Tyler Moore was doing.
Absolutely.
It just was in a very different way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a way that that's not my favorite list of 1980 Best Actor nominees either.
No.
And there's no real explanation for that one either.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take it a step further. How was he never nominated? Period.
Yeah, really.
Yes.
That's the real head scratcher.
Well, that's
for
the
me.
one that I'm going to jump into,
Yeah.
which is Myrna Loy.
Yeah.
That one to me feels just absolutely wrong.
Yeah. Speaking to that, even though, like I said, it's not even nominated, and people, if they just hear that, they think it's a book about people who were never nominated for an Oscar, and then the subtitle 40
See your
overlooked,
subtitles, like,
overlooked
Those long
co-stars
titles
of
were-
Oscar-winning performances.
Yes.
But to your point about Myrna Loy, it was such a thrill that Myrna Loy and Edward G. Robinson could both be in this book, since for the Golden Age, they're the patron saints of never being nominated ever.
They really
and
are.
the fact that I could include them made me so happy.
Right.
But go speak to Myrna Loy.
Well, no, I mean, the fact that, of course, The Best Years of Our Lives, that's absolutely a brilliant performance.
Sublime.
But I think one of the things that people overlooked about her is it all came so easily.
Yes.
And we've talked about effortless acting acting
Yes.
and how people think, well,
That's
we
easy.
talked about Warren Beatty and Robert Redford, and a couple of films we touched on early in their careers where they were not nominated, they didn't receive the attention because they just seem so effortless in what they
Yes.
do. And I wondered if for Myrna, throughout her career, if
Certainly.
that's why that happened.
Certainly. That's the beauty, and particularly in the best years of our lives. She's so authentic. She's so honest. The way she listens to her daughter, Teresa Wright, in her romantic problems.
Yes.
And of course, the most famous scene in the movie is the homecoming. And that's all, the camera's on Myrna.
So great.
And it's so beautiful. It's so
I just
honest,
got
so
goosebumps
real.
thinking
It's so
about it.
real. And who else could have represented what she represents in that scene? Every woman in America who was waiting for a soldier to come home.
Right.
She was already tagged the perfect wife for the William Powell movies.
Yes.
And of course, the casting, again, perfect.
It was.
And I guess in her case, not being nominated was the fact that the role isn't as large as Fredric March's or Dana Andrews' roles.
Yeah.
But
without her,
without her.
Yeah.
And she certainly should have been up
it's
for
not
it.
the
Yeah,
same.
totally agree.
I want to continue, and I know you do. We have so much more to talk about. But right now, we need to tell our listeners this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
Well, we do we? So the pop quiz question today is, of course, it's going to involve our special guest, John DiLeo, today. In his fantastic book, which we're talking about today, Not Even Nominated, he mentions that Miriam Hopkins should have been nominated for an Oscar for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1931, which I completely agree with. She also missed out on another potential Oscar nomination and perhaps a win when she was first originally offered an iconic role that later went to Claudette Colbert, but a back injury caused her to drop out, and it then went to Miriam's greatest rival in Hollywood.
Oh.
What was the role and what was the movie? And I'm sure John knows.
I see John shaking his head.
I was afraid I wouldn't. I'd be so embarrassed to have to be the guest who didn't know the answer.
Well, we will be right back with the answer to that and more chatting with the wonderful John DiLeo after this.
All right, Steve and Nan will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. Hollywood is famous for feuds, some of them bitter, between actors, directors, producers, even studio chiefs. Well, the feud between actress Bette Davis and her nemesis, Joan Crawford, is still legendary, even by today's standards. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane came out in 1962. You'll remember it's about a former child star who torments her paraplegic sister, also a former film star, in an old Hollywood mansion. Now, during one scene, Hollywood legend says actress Bette Davis kicked Joan Crawford so hard, Crawford ended up needing stitches. Well, she couldn't just let that go. So to retaliate, Crawford put weights in her pockets to make it harder for Davis to drag Crawford's seemingly lifeless body across the set. Crawford was so heavy from those weights that Bette Davis threw out her back. Isn't that just delicious? And now back to Steve and Nan from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. We're very excited to have author John DiLeo with us today. But before we get back into more fun talks with John, I wanted to give a shout out to our listener of the week, and that is Jimbo Wood of Huntsville, Alabama. Not only is he a loyal listener, but he's a celebrity in his own right as the popular morning DJ of the Jimbo and Casio show on Rocket 95.1 FM.
Are you kidding? That is so cool.
Yes, big fan of our show.
I love you, Jimbo. Thank
And a
you
great
so much.
guy.
That's
Thanks,
awesome.
Jimbo.
All right, John, I got to ask you a question. So, in your previous book, There Are No Small Parts, 100 Outstanding Film Performances with Screen Time of 10 minutes or less. There's so many, I know, because you say there's 100, right? That's a lot. But are there like one or two that, maybe your top three that still just keep you awake at night?
Well, this was the opposite of Not Even Nominated, where I said I'm working from a finite list of Oscar winners
Yes.
and who wasn't nominated
Yes.
in movies with those people. This was every movie has performances that are less than 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
So then you really, you're overwhelmed by the possibilities and
Absolutely.
horrified you're going to forget something really obvious years later and wake up, in a cold sweat.
Yes.
In that case, I'll give you one famous person, and that was the inspiration for that book. I'm sure you've seen Frank Capra's Mr. Deeds Goes to Town.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Gary Cooper, Jean Arthur, 1936. Well, midway through the movie, the plot changes, the main character's outlook changes because this fish out of water comedy is suddenly, we have the depression suddenly thrust in our faces when John Ray, playing a nameless character called Farmer, bursts in the door and says, "What are you doing? People are starving out there." He comes in with a gun, but then he breaks down into tears and he's invited to stay. It's a scene, he's in the movie for 4 minutes, and every time I see it, I burst into tears.
Yeah,
and I thought,
yeah.
wow, look, you could come into a movie, you don't have a name, you're only in it for 4 minutes, it now has a different plot. Mr. Deeds has decided to give away all the money, and you're touched forever by this man representing millions. And so that was the inspiration. So I loved writing about someone no one's ever heard of, really.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You think, I hope there's a great nephew somewhere that's thought, wow.
Yes.
But then more obvious ones that I loved writing about was, Thelma Ritter's film debut in Miracle on 34th Street,
so great.
where you get how her 2 minutes would make, we have to sign this woman.
Yes, right now.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
She's,
Grab her now.
And then, of course, Marilyn Monroe in All About Eve, which again, it's like 3 minutes, and you think, 3 minutes? But why do I remember every moment like she's in it for a half hour?
Yeah.
Right,
But
right.
because every moment counts, and there's no one like her in it.
Right.
And she gets every laugh in a completely different way than from everybody else.
Right.
And so that was fun. Or, another fun one is Emery Parnell in Mr. Blanding's Builds His Dream House. He's the painter.
Oh, yes.
Nope, we all know the scene.
Yes.
All he says is, okay, and and yeah. And that's all he says.
the timing of it is so
And he's working
it's
with Myrna
perfection.
Loy. It's like he's one of her great partners, like William Powell and Fredric
I
March.
love that. And then he's like, yellow, blue, red,
exactly.
green. Done.
Don't you wish you could go back in time and be on set the day they shot that and just see how they figured it out? And, was it sort of improvised? Did they rehearse it a lot? I mean, those kinds of moments are just delicious.
Or do they know that it's going to be a classic scene, or is it just another day at the office?
Or is it another day at the office?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Those are great choices.
Those are great choices. We all have our favorites. We all have actors and actresses that we're drawn to particularly. Who are some of your favorites?
Well, I do love all the people, the big ones that everyone loves. I love them too, whether it's, Bogart or Cary Grant or Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis. So I never really mention them as my favorites because they don't need my help.
Right.
So I like to...
Well-traveled path.
Yeah, exactly. They don't need me. When I'm asked about favorites, I always mention two that often will get a little bit of a, oh. And my favorite movie actor is Joel McCrea. And my favorite movie actress is Ida Lupino. Because I'm always trying
Love
to
Ida
get
here.
more attention to them.
Yes.
They weren't nominated for Oscars either. Joel McCrea is in the book for The More the Merrier because Charles Coburn won. And I was very happy I found a place for him.
Yeah.
But I love both of them, and people who know classic film, of course, know who they are, but they're not famous anymore.
Not anymore,
We have a future episode coming up next year sometime on Ida Lupino.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, big
looking
fan of
forward
hers.
to that.
Also,
Yeah.
And of course, with the directing that came after it,
Yes,
another whole
and
component.
a woman, in
Which
that time
I
period.
love that was so kept quiet for so long, and then all of a sudden she's finally getting her due as this groundbreaking female director.
Right, and I remember as a little kid going to see
The Trouble with Angels.
The Trouble with Angels.
Yeah.
As a little girl, if I had known that a woman directed that, I mean, it really was kind of a remarkable thing.
Don't forget
the
Devil's
time.
Reign.
Oh yeah, right. Devil's
That was
Reign.
probably the first Ida Lupino movie that I saw.
that you ever saw. Okay.
And even in all of its horror and grotesqueness, I loved her.
Yeah, you just knew.
I just knew she had something
She
special.
had something.
Yeah.
There's definitely something going on there. So, John, what about, since we're talking about favorite actors, what about a favorite classic film? Can you even list one that you go, it's at the top of my list of any genre?
It's funny because when I started doing this like 25 years ago and people had asked me that question, I'd always like, oh my God, I have to have an answer for that. Because I'm going to be asked it all the time.
Right.
And I didn't just come up with something. I do have an answer. My favorite movie of all time is The Bandwagon with Fred Astaire.
Oh, wow.
nice.
That's
There
an-
isn't even a second or third.
That's an
my
interesting
absolute
choice.
favorite movie.
What
Fred
about it?
Astaire is my favorite person of the 20th century.
Okay.
And that's his best movie. And I love MGM musicals. And I love Manelli. And I love Sid Charisse. And it's like, I love backstage musicals. And that's the best one that has ever been of the countless number of them.
Right.
And so it's everything I could want.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's the greatest movie of all time.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Of course not. But it is my favorite.
Yeah. And there is a distinction, I think.
Yes,
Greatest
there is a
movie of all
distinction.
time. We could, argue that, but I think we each have our own
Yes.
What is your all-time favorite, Steve?
Oh, it's The Graduate.
Oh, right. We talked about that just 2 weeks ago.
Hands down my
Yeah,
favorite film.
yeah.
What's yours?
I think mine, hands down, would be To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
I love both of those.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I've showed all three of them at the Milford Theater.
Oh, have you?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I want to throw a curve a little bit because, and it's not a question that you know about. You know, we talk about Oscars being sports, but half the fun is to bitch about it. Of course. And you know, there's people that win that we're just like, what? How in the hell did that happen?
Yes.
Is there one particular performance that you're like, how did that happen?
There's quite a few of them.
Or give
but-
us
Do
a
you want to
couple.
publicly
Give us a couple.
state them?
I'll say it's mentioned in the book, and,
Okay.
and she's still alive, so I feel bad.
Well, that's
but,
okay.
Well, it's in print, baby. So
And it's just, there are a lot, but one just, since I'm on the spot, as you said, and I'm going to go back to a movie that I really like, that I mentioned, Elmer Gantry, Shirley Jones and Elmer Gantry. It's not an Academy Award
It's not.
performance.
I'm so with you there,
It's
brother.
one of those good for you performances.
Yeah.
You're a
You're the-
musical comedy
You're the good girl
ingenue.
that played slutty, and now you
played
get an Oscar.
A prostitute. We don't
Yes.
believe for 2 seconds that you're a prostitute.
No.
You're acting with two terrific people who are
Right.
making you even look a little weaker.
Yeah.
There were so many. I mentioned in the book, like there was another Jones, Carolyn Jones, who was right there, who probably would have been stunning in that part
so good.
and deserved. And again, I feel like I would have been okay with Shirley Jones being nominated as I said, where this is a sign of encouragement. You're really going places.
Yeah.
Yes.
And let's see where it takes you. But
Right.
to an Oscar? I
yeah,
don't think so.
it is interesting the recipe of how those things come together.
Yes.
You know, you did something like I'm thinking of Grace Kelly,
Yeah.
in The Country
Yes.
Girl, and you
Which
know,
I have thoughts on
played-
that.
Yeah, yes, I
we all?
Thoughts on that.
exactly.
No,
And when they play against type, you know what they've been typecast as,
Right.
it really becomes, oh, look at them.
It was the Donna Reed and From Here to Eternity award, but she was
Right.
better.
She was much better than
Right.
Shirley
Better,
Jones.
but-
I agree.
Yeah,
Right.
but yeah, it is that. Oh my gosh, look at you, and
Yeah.
even Mary Tyler Moore with Ordinary People.
Similar.
It is those
Yeah.
kinds of what seems to be brave and risky.
Yeah.
even if it actually often isn't, but it has the appearance of.
Right.
I would love to ask some details about your research process. Your writing, as I mentioned earlier, it's so wonderfully specific. How many times have you seen the films that you're talking about? And what is the process in general in researching a book?
Well, in this particular book, I had seen all the movies before I knew I was going to write about them,
Right.
of course.
But once or multiple times?
Depends.
Yeah.
Certainly once, probably in most cases more than once
Yeah.
through the many years.
Yeah.
And of course, once I was considering them, I would sit down and watch them straight through, no stops, just to experience the movie again, what it did to me now.
Yeah.
Yes.
If it's 20 years since I've seen it. And then if it was a yes, then it was basically to go back and watch every moment that the person I was going to write about is in it and take detailed notes, going through it very slowly, stopping, starting, watching scenes over and over, making sure the details were right in terms of the facts
Right.
of
Well,
what
that's
color
what-
things were or whatever.
That's what's so beautiful about your writing is you're so detailed and you really break down characters in such a succinct, really wonderful way.
Yeah. Thank
you.
It's really a strength you have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So then I put everything into the computer, like as a rough draft, no editing in my head, just everything. And then come back to it like the next day and start from scratch, like a sculptor chipping away at, oh, this is, I don't need this, or this is exactly what that is, make it one thing, and
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right.
And try to give it a shape. And then go back to the movie when I'm almost done, because sometimes you get too creative and you realize, no, I got, that's not what actually happened.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
slight things that are not accurate anymore.
Right.
And then I correct those. And then I usually put the chapter aside when I can read it straight through without changing anything. I will later, like in a couple of months. But if I can get through, I think each of these pieces, first draft took a week, and then leave it alone if I could read it without really changing anything. I wrote it out of order, stack it chronologically, and then,
Yeah.
figure out. Because sometimes you learn so much in the process of writing that you don't want to start from the beginning, because then the reader might notice how you're changing the way you're writing it as it's going on.
Yeah.
But if you do it out of order, any kind of inconsistencies just seem kind of fun. That, oh, this is a little,
Right.
oh, he's doing it this way. And it kind of blends in well. So
That's interesting.
I'm afraid to start. Actually, the Miriam Hopkins one was the first one I wrote.
Oh, was it?
was.
Okay.
It's like the fourth or fifth one in the book.
It was really engaging.
It was very engaging.
And then I jump around.
Yeah.
And so, but I always write the last chapter last.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
when you
that's
feel like
interesting.
you want to know where it's all been heading.
Yeah.
As if, I don't know.
Was there something about researching this book that surprised you?
Well, first, I do want to answer, but it made me think of something that people usually get a kick out of this when you ask about how I work.
Yeah.
When I started the second book, I realized it's going to be an endless process if every time I'm writing about someone in one movie and I mention the other things, I can't watch every movie they ever made every time I write about a person. So I need my own reference system. So in the year, I think it was the year 2000, I started to write an index card for every movie I ever watched. Handwritten, front and back.
Wow.
Alphabetized in a file. And now it's 2024 and I have 8,000 cards.
Wow.
But those cards are my reference. So if I'm writing about Gene Simmons and in Elmer Gantry, and I think, well, Guys and Dolls, Home Before Dark, Hamlet, it's like I pull every Gene Simmons card.
Yeah, that's such
and
a
then
great...
circle the thing about what I thought of her. And that's what you read in this
Yeah.
when I'm talking about the other stuff. Now, what was the actual question?
Yeah, what was in your research? What was the most surprising thing?
Yes.
Yeah,
well, that's so much in the doing of it, and I loved this about it. Was that I had a fixed idea, like Mary Poppins.
Yes.
I thought this is a no-brainer. I know everyone makes fun of his Cockney accent, but Dick Van Dyke wasn't nominated.
Right.
Julie Andrews won. I'll do a piece on Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins. One of the greatest talents of his time.
Yes.
He does
Yes,
everything. And he's such a great, and I would be delighted. So I sit down and watch the movie, which is the first movie I ever loved. It came out when I was 3. I saw it multiple times. And I was delighted that I could write about this movie. And I'm watching it and thinking, oh my God, I've seen it in the years since, but I certainly didn't notice when I was 3 that it's about the father. It's about this man learning how to be a husband and father who pays attention to his kids and gets out of being over-regimented. And Mary Poppins is the catalyst for him to change, not for the kids to have a nanny
Adventure,
so much.
yeah.
Or adventures and
Right.
have tea parties on the ceiling. She's there to awaken him. And I thought, oh my God, I'm writing about David Tomlinson for this piece. Dick Van Dyke is delightful, but he has absolutely nothing to do with the plot.
Right.
And
He doesn't.
You could cut him out and we wouldn't really know.
He's a good dance
He's good
partner.
company.
Yeah.
He's good company,
He's good
but he has nothing
company.
to do with it. So
Yeah.
I thought David Tomlinson gives a beautiful performance.
He does.
He gets the final number.
Yeah,
Right.
he does.
He gets the big number, and he should have been up for Best Supporting Actor, and that was fun about being surprised.
I love that.
Yeah, and there might have been another example like that, but that was the most pronounced. Like that was the one. That's happened with other books. That happened with this one too. 100 Great Film Performances You Should Remember, but probably don't. that I would watch a movie thinking it was going to be one person, and there was someone I liked better, and it switched.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
Well, kind of going back to 100 great performances that you should know but probably don't, you chose some really great people. One in particular that rewatched this movie, and I think you guys did too, Jan Sterling, Ace in the Hole.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
She's one of my favorites.
She's one of our
such
favorites
a fan
too.
of
Yeah.
hers. And what about her performance made you include her in that book?
Well, I would have voted for her as Best Supporting Actress, give her the Oscar.
Hands down.
She wasn't nominated.
Yeah.
She's, again, someone who really cuts to it. And at a time where it's still the golden age of Hollywood, and you only kind of go so far in a lot of ways in terms of how ugly you can be.
Right.
And she really goes for it. I mean, that character is hard and cold as can be and never gives an inch, never does anything to make you not hate her.
Right.
But yet you kind of have sympathy for her.
You root for her a little bit, yeah.
I think it's because she's funny that you like her. Because, God, what kind of zinger is she going to come up with next?
Oh, she is very funny.
You know, I don't like church because kneeling bags my nylon. I mean, how could you not like someone who came up with that?
Classic.
You know, so I love her. I do love her. And I loved writing about Ace in the Hole, which was a flop at the box office. So, of course, again, for that same reason, it was a little too much for 1951.
pretty dark.
Right.
Yeah,
It
ahead
is-
of its
it is,
time
yeah.
and not giving an inch.
Yeah.
You know.
You've been long associated with the Black Bear Film Festival, and you've had an opportunity to interview some pretty amazing classic film stars. Can you talk about what interviews stand out and why?
Well, I have to say, the format is we usually show a movie of one of these people, and then they come up on stage, and I interview them for the audience. it's been a joy because some of these people, I think particularly Jane Powell, it was one that was like, oh my God, I
love her.
And my parents came up and my mother loved her. My partner at the time was had the Seven Brides 78, and it was everyone was kind of, and she was so lovely and sweet and happy. I think a lot of the older ones who were retired at this point, it was, you could see them. They had very simple lives now, ordinary lives that they loved, the privacy, but they had this magic they could tap into if they wanted to.
Yes.
Like, if I say yes to this film festival, I can be a movie star again for 2 days and take it all in. Like, I've had enough. I'm going back to my life.
And I can step away and go back to my
like taking it out of a box. And the place would go crazy, and then you go back to your life. And so for the older ones, it was kind of like that. And they were always, I'd say, grateful in a sense. Not that they necessarily needed it, but they enjoyed it. I'm talking about Arlene Dahl. Tab Hunter was a wonderful, wonderful guest. So much fun. But they all were in their own way. And I'm joking about it as I'm getting older. Then a couple have been the children of Lorna Luft, Gary Cooper's daughter, Maria. And this year, Ileana Douglas, who, of course, has had her own career, but the granddaughter of Melvin. And I did an event in New York before I came out here with Robert Mitchum's granddaughter, Carrie, who was wonderful, too.
Lovely.
So it's sort of like, this is where we are now. But I came in at the end where enough of those people from movies of the 40s and 50s were around in their 80s, sometimes 90s.
Yeah.
Right.
And still had the great stories. And it was wonderful to ask questions that had never been answered in any of the books I read about these people. Like asking Lorna Luft, did Judy Garland go to the Oscars the second time with Judgment at Nuremberg? I've never seen a picture. And she said so she was all dressed up and ready to go, but she was so certain she was going to lose. She was looking for a way out. And I think what she said was Joey had like coughed and something. It was like, Joey's sick, we're not going. It was something delightful like that, because I was like, I suspect she wasn't there because there's no pictures, but I never remember anyone saying anything. So for me, it was like, what are the questions I get to ask from the horse's mouth? Exactly. So that was
wonderful.
That was fun.
I love that. Going back to Jane Powell, which film did you show? And was Dickie Moore there?
Dickie Moore had just passed away a few months earlier.
Great couple.
Yeah, but we showed Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And
what about Farley Granger? I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah. I would
we
love
showed
to hear
Strangers
about him.
on a Train.
We just did a Ruth Roman episode and talked about him for quite a bit.
He was one that was a little like, okay, I'll do it. Like, he hadn't really, he wasn't like some of the others. He wasn't necessarily looking to tap into his stardom. But I have to say, once he got on the stage, he had so much fun.
Did you talk about Rope with him as well?
Oh, sure. We talk about it, all their movies, not so much personal stuff. Because
They Live by Night, one of my favorites. Kathy O'Donnell.
They've all been, again, it's so funny because I lived in New York for 30 years. I never met any of these people. I moved to a small town in Pennsylvania. There's a film festival around the corner, and suddenly I'm meeting all these people. If you had told me that was possible, I was like, how?
How is that possible?
How is that possible?
Again, we circle back to the beginning. You are doing the thing that you are meant to do, that
And
you
I
are
made
called
them all
to do.
come to me,
That's right. You don't have
Brilliant.
to
Yes.
Well,
whether they wanted to or not.
John, this has been delightful. I want to make sure that we let our listeners know how they can purchase. What's the best way to purchase your book?
Well, all my books are available on Amazon. That's certainly the easiest way, but it's at all the bookstores. So if you rather go through a bookstore, an independent bookstore, just go and ask them to order it for you.
Right.
And they will.
Great.
Because they can. And then I try to go into any bookstore I pass to see if my book is there. If it's there, I say, may I sign it? They always say, yes, please, that's wonderful. If it's not there, I say, here's my card. You should look this up. And I think your crowd would like it. So.
Good.
Oh, how nice.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, John. I think you should give the Hollywood Pop quiz, and I think, John, you should give the answer.
I think so. Well, of course, the question was talking about Miriam Hopkins, that she missed out on a potential Oscar nomination when she was originally offered an iconic role. She passed. It went to Claudette Colbert. Back injury knocked her out. And then it went to Miriam's greatest rival in Hollywood. What was the movie and what was the role?
All About Eve, Margot Channing.
Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. Absolutely. It was originally offered to Miriam Hopkins first. I don't think a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
And she just passed on it. She just didn't find it that interesting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Miriam, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, John DiLeo. This has been just delightful.
Thank you, Nan. Thank you, Steve.
We would love it, everyone, if you would give us a 5-star review, especially after this episode. And follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and you can actually watch the podcast on YouTube, where you'll find some pretty amazing photographs.
And you can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.